Despite Animal Crossing being one of the most wholesome games out there, it somehow manages to have one of the most divisive fan bases. Ever since the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, the debates between those who prefer that game or New Leaf have seemingly been never-ending. So today I want to objectively look at all of the games in the series and ask which is the best. The thing is though, it's really not as simple as looking at which game has the most content, because more isn't always better. At the same time, just because a game doesn't have that much content doesn't mean it's the worst game. To truly understand what makes the perfect Animal Crossing game, we have to go through the history of the series, dating all the way back to the N64. While those of us in the West might remember the first Animal Crossing being on the GameCube, in reality its first installment was for the Nintendo 64, exclusively in Japan. Under the title Animal Forest, this game is not too far off from its GameCube version. In fact, it's mostly just a very simplistic version of the game. If you didn't tell me otherwise, I couldn't tell the difference between these two games, which is just a testament to how much they pushed the limits of the N64. Fun fact, since Animal Forest used time as a major factor in the game, but the N64 didn't have an internal clock, the cartridge of the game came with one inside of it. Everything said about this game would mostly apply to the GameCube version though, so let's move on to that. The first Animal Crossing game was released in North America on September 16th, 2002, and it was significantly improved in this version. New content included things like a museum, a tailor, and plenty of new characters to interact with. Honestly though, there isn't much to talk about with this release. It is mostly a basic version of Animal Crossing after all. Fishing, bug catching, and interacting with the villagers are pretty much all there was to do here. If we want to talk about this game's commercial success though, it did really well. I mean, as well as you could do on the GameCube, selling 2.7 million copies. Admittedly, I was born a few years after this game came out, so I never really made any childhood memories with it, but I have to say, it's a great start to the series. I can't name anything explicitly bad about this game that doesn't have anything to do with it just being outdated at this point. I mean, maybe the only issue I have is just the town being divided into a grid instead of seamlessly connected. Objectively, all of the other entries in the series outperform this one, although it's a great benchmark to judge how closely the other games capture that Animal Crossing spirit. This game established the peaceful nature of the franchise perhaps better than any other, and if this is your favorite, I really can't blame you. Oh, also, the villagers in this game are absolutely hilarious and a true testament to the Wild West of gaming that was the early 2000s. Next, let's talk about my childhood Animal Crossing, Wild World. With the new DS console being released in 2004, it was time for Animal Crossing to make its first handheld appearance the following year. On release, Wild World sold ridiculously well, and it eventually ended up selling almost 12 million copies, making it the 9th best-selling game on the DS. This is the peak of the basic style of Animal Crossing. What I mean by this is that this game perfected the style of the GameCube version without adding anything drastically new like New Leaf and New Horizons did. That being said, this game did add a lot. The biggest change though doesn't really have anything to do with the game, and that's portability. Now you could play Animal Crossing wherever you please. In bed, on a plane, even the toilet, you could play your favorite game. Besides this though, you had new features like online play being introduced, finally allowing you to visit a friend's town and just mess around. As for the normal gameplay, basically everything was improved one way or another. More stuff to buy, new villagers to interact with, and the atmosphere was as strong as ever. Obviously the visuals weren't great since it was on the DS, but no one really noticed at the time. There is one really dumb part of Wild World that I didn't like though, and that's the lack of real holidays. I guess Nintendo wanted to make the game more generalized for a worldwide release, but if I'm being honest, it just made the game disappointing, kind of, especially since the GameCube version literally had holidays already. If I'm comparing Wild World to the previous game, I have to say, it's better, but now is where the series starts to get divisive. After the initial release of the Wii, Nintendo decided it would be wise to have one of their most successful games on a home console once again. The Animal Crossing team decided that since Wild World did so well, they would simply recreate that game on the Wii with a couple of improvements. This would ultimately backfire. Despite how much better the game's graphics, music quality, and even gameplay at times were, City Folk Folk just couldn't garner half of what Wild World got in terms of sales. Why? Well, it's probably a mix of fans being content with Wild World already, and also that City Folk was basically just a remaster of Wild World. I mean, if you think about it, what was the point of getting City Folk if it just tied you down to playing on a home console again? Especially considering that it was basically the same game as Wild World. I don't really remember this game all too well, but I'm pretty sure they also toned down the villagers' dialogue to be less expressive, which is not good. This whole situation is pretty strange though, because if you think about it, City Folk was released during the peak of the Wii era, and it was an installment to an incredibly popular series, and yet it did not perform that well. I guess it just goes to show how much the core audience of franchises used to matter, unlike now where you can pretty much release anything you want on the Switch and it'll be one of the best-selling games of all time. In all seriousness though, I think it's time to talk about what many consider to be the best Animal Crossing game, New Leaf. Although Wild World was my first Animal Crossing, I actually have more nostalgia with this game. When New Leaf released, everyone was expecting some huge changes from previous games. After the lackluster release of City Folk, it was clear to both fans and the developers that Animal Crossing had to innovate if they wanted to keep the series alive. Fortunately, the second the game starts, you can tell that it was made with love. Aside from the great presentation on the brand new 3DS, the game makes it clear that this is turning over a new leaf for Animal Crossing. The moment you enter town, you're told that you are the new mayor of your village. And while things are mostly the same in terms of getting started in an Animal Crossing game, you begin to truly see how this game separates itself from the rest. You might be the mayor, but you still have to live in a tent until you can afford a house, and you can't just make the town exactly how you like it. In reality, being the mayor gives you a ton of work in the beginning of your town, but eventually it starts to pay off. In New Leaf, new features like public works projects and ordinances perfectly address previous issues with Animal Crossing, such as lack of customization and accessibility. For example, some people would really struggle with playing previous games at early morning or late night since everything would be closed. This is less of a problem in New Leaf since you can activate the Night Owl or Early Bird ordinance. Another example of this is the Beautiful Town ordinance that prevents stuff like cockroaches and weeds ruining your town's image. Public works projects also significantly improved the player's experience because they allowed you to actually customize your village. This isn't the end of new content though, since right above your town is Main Street, where a bunch of different shops and buildings can be built over time. And I haven't even mentioned the new store retail, which allows you to buy, sell, and even customize furniture or clothes. To the bottom of your town, there's also a dock that can take you to an island, which hosts a plethora of mini games, rare fish and bugs, and a little shop with exclusive items. Other than all of these changes, they also expanded upon multiplayer. While visiting towns was great, there was a new feature that allowed people to visit your village at any time if you had a code. This enabled a ton of creativity with gimmick villages. Sometimes they would even be used to tell a story. It's actually kind of crazy how much this game added to the series, especially when you consider that it eventually got a huge free DLC. Now, did New Leaf have some faults? Maybe to some. A lot of people didn't like how tame a lot of the dialogue was in this game compared to Wild World and the original, but it's not that bad in my opinion. And obviously there's a lot of features in New Horizons that we wish we would have had in New Leaf, but again, I don't know if that's a fair comparison. But I think to me, the most memorable part about this game was actually the music. You know, it's funny because when we remember games from our childhood, we feel very nostalgic, obviously. But I feel like this game was nostalgic on release. And it's really hard to get a feeling like that, so I don't know, maybe that's why I like it so much. You know, this game is just so impressive to me, and I think it deserves a video of its own. But that doesn't mean it's the best game. At least we should consider the sequel to this game first, New Horizons. This game came out at quite possibly the best time it could have. Everyone was stuck at home and craving a great game to play. On release, I think this had to be the most hype ever generated for an Animal Crossing game. It had been 8 years since New Leaf came out, and the Switch needed a proper Animal Crossing game. So on March 20th, 2020, Nintendo released New Horizons to one of the greatest video game receptions of all time. Any sales number there was to break was smashed by this game, and today it has sold over 44 million copies, making it the second best Switch title and the 14th best-selling game of all time. Now, if you just assume the sales of a game correlated with its gameplay quality, this would easily be the best Animal Crossing game, but let's actually see what the game brought to the table. Immediately, we see that the formula for New Horizons is slightly different than usual. Instead of moving into an established town, you basically start your own on a deserted island. After getting acquainted with your island, Tom Nook gives you a phone, which is pretty funny, and introduces you to a brand new currency system called Nook Miles. Now, these go alongside with bells, but that doesn't really matter. Eventually, you discover a new crafting system that lets you make different items and furniture. So far, everything seems quite nice and very different from previous games. Although there's one thing that gave me a really bad feeling during this little intro sequence: that music. For the first few days of playing this game, you will have to hear this same track on repeat, and it's not even good. I distinctly remember being reluctant to even play this game anymore just because of how annoying this track was. But it's okay, because at least the hourly music is just as good as the other games, right? Okay, maybe not. Yeah, I guess this soundtrack isn't that bad, and there's actually quite a few great hourly tracks, but to me, it's just so inconsistent. One track will be a beautifully composed, relaxing piece, and then you'll have a random track consisting of one of the most disgusting basses I've ever heard. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit for dramatic effect, but this is honestly what I thought of when playing the game. Besides music though, how does the overall gameplay compare to its predecessors? Well, actually, it's pretty fun. For the first time, you really have unlimited freedom to do whatever you want with your island. With the new ability to terraform and to place furniture wherever you like, there's hardly any limit to what you can do. This did not come without a price though. As a result of so many resources being devoted to the creative side of Animal Crossing, it seems to have ignored a fundamental part of the game: the villagers. Looking from a distance, villagers are more expressive than ever and can be seen doing everyday activities outside. The issues begin to reveal themselves when you see how incredibly boring they are. It's like they barely ever want to talk to you, and when they do, it's just something generic most of the time. Outside of normal villagers, there isn't even that many recurring characters returning in this game. Obviously, the mainstays like Tom Nook, Blathers, and Isabelle are here, but the game is still missing so many others. I really could not get hooked to this game because of all these problems, which sucks because everything else about it is so good. To me, this game felt somewhat unfinished on release, which certainly was helped by some later updates they did. The issue is they stopped doing free updates for the game in late 2021, not even 2 years after it was released. Obviously, the game had performed exceptionally well due to several factors like the time of release and the console it was on, but in my opinion, I'm not even sure if we can call this the best Animal Crossing. New Horizons certainly had that Breath of the Wild effect, where it brought in an incredible amount of non-fans into the series. That cannot be denied. But when several other factors of what makes a great Animal Crossing game are seemingly ignored, well, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I know lots of people have gotten a lot more mileage out of this game than me, which is perfectly fine, since as long as you have fun, that's what matters. All I'm saying is New Horizons is certainly not the best Animal Crossing game for me, which leaves the question, which is the best Animal Crossing game overall? Well, as much as I'd like to attribute this title to a game like Wild World or even the original, it's impossible to deny how much New Leaf perfected the original style of Animal Crossing and then added so much to it. New Leaf is simple and yet complex in the amount of options you have. Do I wish that New Leaf had a lot of features from New Horizons? Absolutely. You should be able to place furniture wherever you want. You should be able to terraform your village. But you know what I also like? When my villagers don't become background noise in a game where they're supposed to be a major factor. So yeah, Animal Crossing New Leaf is my favorite game, but I'm just a random guy on the internet, and I want to hear what you have to say about these games too. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But please, just remember that these games are meant to be interpreted in whichever way is most enjoyable to you. So debating things too hard can be kinda silly. We all just want to have a nice, relaxing time after all.